Simon Cowell is one of the most recognized faces in global entertainment, a man celebrated for his razor-sharp critiques, his unwavering bluntness, and his near-legendary ability to remain unmoved by emotion. For decades, audiences around the world watched him sit behind the judges' table with a detached, almost clinical composure, delivering verdicts that could launch careers or shatter dreams without so much as a tremor in his voice. That is precisely why the moment he broke down in tears over Susan Boyle sent shockwaves across the world. It was not merely surprising, it was genuinely unbelievable to those who thought they knew him. Yet that moment happened, and it revealed something profound not only about Simon Cowell, but about the extraordinary woman whose story moved him to tears. Susan Boyle's rise from an obscure Scottish town to global superstardom is one of the most compelling human stories of the modern era. But to truly understand why Simon wept, one must go back to the very beginning, to the quiet, humble life Susan lived long before anyone knew her name. Susan was born in Blackburn, West Lothian, Scotland, into a working-class family with several siblings. From a young age, she carried a deep and genuine love for music, but her path was never straightforward. As a child, she was diagnosed with learning difficulties, which led to misunderstandings and unfair judgments from those around her. These challenges shaped her early social experiences, often leaving her feeling like an outsider. Yet, rather than breaking her spirit, those hardships seemed to quietly fuel a determination within her, a resolve to prove her worth not through loud declarations, but through her talent and her kindness. She grew up largely anonymous, living a modest and private life in her small town. She volunteered for charity, cared for her aging parents as their health declined, and sang in her local church, slowly honing a voice that the world had not yet heard. Her dreams of performing on a grand stage remained personal, tucked away from public view, nurtured only in quiet moments of joy that music brought her. For decades, she lived this way, ordinary on the outside, extraordinary within. What the world would later learn is that Susan had also been living with Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism spectrum disorder that affects social interaction and communication. This diagnosis, which came later in her life, helped her make sense of the social difficulties she had always experienced. It added yet another layer of complexity to her story, revealing that every performance she gave required not just vocal preparation, but a courage that most people could never fully appreciate. Then came 2009 and everything changed. When Susan Boyle walked onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent, the audience did not know what to expect, and based on first impressions, most expected very little. She arrived quietly, wearing a simple dress, looking nothing like the polished performers the show typically celebrated. The murmurs in the crowd were audible. The skepticism on the judges' faces was plain. Even Simon Cowell, with his years of experience, wore the unmistakable expression of someone bracing for an awkward audition. Then she opened her mouth. From the very first note of I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables, the atmosphere in the room transformed completely. Her voice, rich, powerful, and deeply emotive, poured across the stage and silenced every whisper of doubt. The audience rose to their feet. The judges sat stunned. Simon Cowell, the man who had reduced countless contestants to tears with a single dismissive remark, was visibly shaken. He later admitted that he had been entirely unprepared for the emotion her voice unleashed in him. It was, by any measure, one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of reality television. The video of her audition spread across the internet with breathtaking speed, accumulating millions of views within days. People from every corner of the world watched it and felt something shift inside them. Susan became an instant symbol, not just of talent, but of hope. She was proof that genuine ability and authentic spirit could break through even the most stubborn barriers of prejudice and expectation. The media declared her a sensation overnight. Record deals followed. Albums broke sales records. International tours were announced. The fairy tale, it seemed, had arrived, but fairy tales rarely tell the full story. The sudden, overwhelming nature of Susan's fame brought with it pressures she was wholly unprepared for. She was thrust into a world of relentless media scrutiny, packed schedules, and public expectations. a world that contrasted sharply with the quiet, structured life she had always known. For someone with Asperger's syndrome, where sensory sensitivities and the need for routine are deeply important, the chaotic demands of celebrity life were particularly difficult to manage. The media, rather than focusing always on her extraordinary gift, sometimes chose to comment on her appearance or personal quirks, adding unnecessary cruelty to an already overwhelming experience. Susan spoke openly about her anxiety during this period, about the way the spotlight could be both exhilarating and deeply isolating at the same time. Her honesty was groundbreaking. At a time when celebrity culture rarely acknowledged mental health struggles, she stood up and spoke plainly about her own, helping to chip away at the stigma that surrounds those conversations. Audiences who had fallen in love with her voice now fell in love with her courage. Through all of this, Simon Cowell was watching. His role shifted in ways that surprised even those closest to him. The judge, who had first expressed stunned admiration from behind a panel, became something more, a protector, a supporter, and in many genuine ways, a friend. He expressed concern publicly about the intensity of the media's focus on Susan, criticizing the initial headlines that had mocked her before she had even sung a single note. He defended her right to privacy and to be treated with basic human dignity. This protective instinct revealed a dimension of Simon that television cameras had rarely captured, and it deepened the public's understanding of who he truly was beneath the carefully constructed exterior. Their relationship evolved into something rare and meaningful in an industry not known for its depth of human connection. Susan appreciated Simon's honesty and the way he had championed her from that very first audition. In interviews, she acknowledged that his early praise had been a turning point, a validation of years of private dedication that she had never been sure the world would recognize. For his part, Simon has described Susan as one of the most remarkable people he has ever encountered in his career. He has said that she taught him to look beyond appearances, to resist the instinct to judge before listening, and to recognize that every person who steps onto a stage carries within them a story far more complex than what the eye can see. As the years passed and Susan continued to navigate both the rewards and the burdens of fame, Simon's admiration for her only deepened. She faced health setbacks, including a serious lung infection that forced her to step back from work for a period. She experienced the profound grief of losing her parents, those quiet anchors of her earlier life, while simultaneously managing the demands of a public career. She made deliberate choices to protect her well-being, selecting her appearances and commitments with greater care, modeling for her audiences what it looks like to understand and respect one's own limits. Rather than diminishing her in the public eye, this only increased the admiration people felt for her. It was against this backdrop, years of watching Susan's courage, her struggles, her resilience, and her quiet grace, that Simon finally broke down. When the moment came during a reflective televised conversation about her journey, his tears were not simply about a beautiful voice or a memorable audition. They represented the accumulated emotional weight of having witnessed a human being navigate extraordinary circumstances with dignity. His tears carried the pride of watching someone overcome what the world told them they could not overcome, and the sorrow of knowing how steep and painful that climb had truly been. The reaction from audiences worldwide was significant. People who had long viewed Simon as the cold, calculating face of the entertainment industry suddenly saw something entirely different. They saw a man who felt deeply, who recognized complexity, and who was not afraid, in that moment at least, to let that complexity show. It sparked conversations not just about Susan's story, but about empathy itself, about the way we treat people who live their lives in public view, and about the invisible battles that often accompany visible success. Susan Boyle's legacy extends well beyond her record sales or her television appearances. She became a symbol for everyone who has ever been dismissed too quickly, judged too harshly, or underestimated simply because they did not fit the expected mold. She opened doors for broader conversations about neurodiversity, mental health, and the immense courage it takes to be vulnerable in front of the world. Her story challenged the entertainment industry to look more carefully at how it treats the people whose talent it celebrates, and to consider what structures of support are necessary for those who experience sudden, transformative fame. Simon Cowell's tears, in the end, were a tribute to all of that. They were a recognition that Susan Boyle's story is not simply an inspiring anecdote about an unlikely star. It is a deeply human story about perseverance, compassion, and the powerful, lasting impact of choosing to believe in someone when the rest of the world has already made up its mind. Together, their story reminds us of something simple, but essential, that the most extraordinary lives are rarely the most obvious ones, and that the truest measure of success is not the applause at the end of a performance, but the strength it took to walk onto the stage in the first place.